Nick Wright joins us live. I will say this. You have been, I think, I have questioned at times Tatum. You have at times have questioned the Celtics. I said this earlier, that history tells me the alpha wins, whether it's Mahomes in the fourth quarter, Brady, LeBron, Steph, Kobe, MJ. The Celtics are more collaborative. They're more 2024 basketball. Is that sometimes Tatum floats. He's off ball. He doesn't have usage. And I say to myself, this final is a classic matchup of modern collaborative basketball and a little old school Luka Kyrie. Give me the ball, get out of the way, set me a screen. Do you have a strong opinion about this series going into it when the Mavs finish off the T-Wolves?
Yeah, I mean, I'm biased because going into the playoffs, I think I was probably one of the only people in the country that was picking the Mavs to win the championship. And so, yeah, I like how the Mavs look, and I like that they're getting healthy. I know Lively is out, but they're going to be getting, or Lively's out right now, but he should be back for the finals. They could be getting Maxi Kleba, who was a big loss for them. They just haven't shown that back as well. And your point about going with the alpha is the best player in the series does not always win. Right. But if the best player, if you're going to overcome the other team having the best player, you need to have a legendary or at least legendary adjacent team, or the other team needs to be going through significant injury issues or turmoil. And so the Celtics have the resume of a legendary team. They have the point differential of one of the 10 best teams ever. They have the record of one of the 15 best teams ever. I don't see that when I watch them.
Yeah.
And maybe part of that is because all of the teams that are on those lists have a guy who is a guaranteed statue in front of the arena the moment he's done playing guy. And this Celtics team does not have that. They have a Hall of Famer in Jason Tatum, an awesome number 2 in Jaylen Brown, and obviously a very well-constructed roster and maybe the best starting 5 in basketball. But as you and I have discussed previously, if Jason Tatum is the 6th or 7th best player in the league, NBA history tells us typically that doesn't win the championship. In the last 40 years, the only teams to win the championship with the 6th or 7th best player in the league as their best player are the 04 Pistons, where you had the Lakers lose their entire power forward rotation to injury, and they were clearly sick of each other. The 08 Celtics that did it with KG, Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, 3 awesome players, but none best player in the league level, beating Kobe when he was on that level. And the 2011 Mavs, those would be the examples. And the 2011 Mavs we attribute to LeBron melting down, as people call it, in that series. That's the entire list of the last 40 years. Every other champion has had a guy like Luka, a guy who is going to be in the top 20 at a minimum all-time discussion. So that is my hang-up with Boston. And Boston's gaudy record against 3 middling teams, with all of which without their best player for part or all of the series, was not enough to sway me from that initially.
So, it's interesting. And maybe I shouldn't juxtapose this, but it just popped into my head. We celebrated and honored the very unique, outspoken Bill Walton in his passing yesterday. Anti-war, anti-establishment, never antisocial, sit-ins politically at UCLA, and we celebrated it. Kyrie Irving similarly pushed back on our government and a vaccine. I may disagree with him strongly and agree with Walton's stance on the Vietnam War extensively. But it is interesting is that the NBA has always been the sport that allows for some social opinion. And there was almost no market for Kyrie Irving out of Brooklyn. And in retrospect, is that fair? Is that fair? Because he took a stance many did on the vaccine. The Boston thing didn't work, but let's be honest, not every star to a new team works in the history of the league. Michael Jordan ran through coaches. He just stayed in Chicago. What is your view? Not today on Kyrie because it's working, but sort of going into Dallas. What was your opinion on how it would work and his career pre this?
So listen, I don't even know if it's adjusted my opinion so much as I have new information.
Yeah.
The Mavs were my pick to win the title last season. And then they traded for Kyrie, and I was so down on it, I said, well, now they can't win the title because Kyrie had been a negative when it came to winning for 6 consecutive years. That is not who he is now. So I think the fair reading of Kyrie's history, if I may, this will take a moment, is this. Kyrie, before LeBron got to Cleveland, hadn't been a part of winning basketball at the professional level. He gets to Cleveland. They have this dynamic partnership that seems to work brilliantly and beautifully. In the press conference after the final game they play together in the finals in 2017, Kyrie says, basically, put some respect on LeBron James's name. He just averaged a triple-double in these finals. I can't wait to continue playing with and learning from him. Before they set foot on a court together again, he reportedly said, I so badly don't want to be here. I will have knee surgery if you don't trade me. So that seemed to be a very quick flip of the pendulum out of nowhere. He then gets to Boston, and it flatly does not work. His first year there, he's oddly not on the bench for their playoffs when he's hurt. His second year there, he demands to guard Giannis in the playoffs, and they get cooked. He then releases a commercial saying, I hope to be here forever, then demands another trade. In that time frame, right, he scolds the media for saying, how dare you say Kevin Durant and I were plotting to get together in that hallway at the All-Star game. That was just two friends talking, when it turns out they were exactly doing what he said they weren't doing. Gets to Brooklyn, says we don't need a coach. We're all coaches. Steve Nash is co-coach. That doesn't work out. While in Brooklyn, yes, the vaccine, but then also the very odd stubbornness about not backing down about that documentary that he promoted that to this day, I don't think he actually watched. And I don't think he believes those awful things that were in that documentary. I just think he felt boxed in and was like, I'm not going to apologize because that's not who I am. So all of that was the data we had about a player who had dealt with injuries, who hadn't been a part of winning outside of the 3 years with LeBron. That's the data we had. The data we have since then is getting to Dallas, teaming up with Jason Kidd, the relationship with Luka, and his own personal maturation and evolution as a person on and off the court. You are getting the very best version of Kyrie Irving. A socially conscious, thoughtful, good-hearted guy who is not letting so much of the other stuff kind of tear him off the basketball court. And when you have that version of Kyrie, Colin, he's one of the most dynamic under 6'4" players in league history. And so I have massive respect for what Kyrie's done. I have massive respect for Kyrie Irving kind of finding in the public eye who he wants to be. And Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, when he's been available, has always been special to watch. And so, yeah, this is a, into his 30s kind of evolution and reinvention, and of course he deserves enormous credit for that.
So I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. The first team I fell in love with was probably in my region was maybe the Sonics, and then it was the Blazers. The 70s, it was very kind to the Pacific Northwest. Downtown, Freddie Brown, Jack Sikma, Gus Williams, into Bill Walton, Jeff Petrie, Dave Twardzik, all that stuff. Jack Ramsey, the legendary coach. But the league was not televised to the level it is today. I live equidistant between Seattle and Portland, but I was in Washington State, so I got Sonic stuff. But I would occasionally hear Bill Schonely, the Portland radio announcer, who was much more colorful than the Seattle broadcaster. And Walton was this 1974, 75, 76. He was this quirky figure. Mythological almost, because you didn't see him in the regular season. You just heard about this hippie in Portland who nobody could stop, and you'd seen him in college. So this is really the beginning of me watching television in the early 70s. And he was against the war and outspoken and iconoclastic and all this stuff. I said this morning, I believe he's several generations ahead of his time. Not one, that he was Jokic, but a better defender 50 years ago, is that if the injuries didn't take place, and this is hyperbolic perhaps, we would say he's the second best center ever to Kareem. He would never score like Kareem, but the second best center ever.
Oh, I think that's legit.
You think so too?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just think
I think he was on that track.
Yeah.
Listen, if I may, because you and I have oddly different formative experiences with Bill Walton, which I'll get to, but his playing career I saw none of. But because I consider myself a bit of an NBA historian and basketball historian, what should be noted is this. If you ask someone who is the greatest college basketball player of all time, and they give any answer other than Lou Alcindor or Bill Walton, they're wrong.
Right.
Those are the only two eligible answers. Bill Walton did not lose a basketball game from the middle of his junior year of high school until the middle of his senior year of college. He had an 88-game collegiate winning streak. He was the most outstanding player in back-to-back Final Fours. He played arguably the greatest game ever, the 21 of 22, 44 points. He then, in the national championship game, he then walks into the league, and in 1977 is the best player on the champion, beating Kareem, and then beating Dr. J when Dr. J might have been the best player in the world.
Yep.
The next year he's the NBA MVP, and he breaks his foot. And the career is never the same. So my experience with Bill Walton, Colin, and I don't think I've ever told you this, is, and you'll laugh at me when I tell you this. When I was a little kid and I told people what I wanted to do when I grew up, I wanted to be Bill Walton because I didn't know that to be the color commentator, you needed to either play or coach. But what he did on the NBC broadcasts with Steve Snapper Jones, I thought was the coolest thing ever. And it is part of me falling in love with basketball. He's the soundtrack of it. I'm sad that I never once got to cross paths with him to tell him this anecdote. I remember vividly being a little kid watching the NBA playoffs, watching a Bulls game. And my mom saying, seeing a look on my face that I was upset. And she was like, "What's wrong?" And I'm like, "Man, Steve Jones is being so mean to Bill again," because I didn't know they were good friends and they were always giving each other a hard time. And so he is, and for his broadcasting career, the stories that he has, the stances that he took that were dangerous and risky, and he stayed true to himself. And oh yeah, by the way, was the greatest passing big man ever until Jokic, and maybe including Jokic, a legendary life and a legendary career.
Yeah, it's he was so perfectly connected to the Pacific Northwest. Which when I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, it's grainy, it's got it's a little counterculture. You know what I mean? There's no question. He grew up in California, which has always been left of center in America, and then he went up to the Pacific Northwest. That's the only place more left than California.
More left, yeah.
Yeah, and then he got Jack Ramsey, one of the great teachers. I mean, can you imagine that your two coaches? He may have literally had the perfect coaches.
Oh, that's right.
John Wooden, the ultimate teacher, who kind of brought him back on the fairway. Bill could get a little sideways, brought him back on the fairway. And then Jack Ramsey, who was always, from his dress, Jack Ramsey legendary for these wild, disco pants, that Jack Ramsey kind of leaned in to the unique personality of Bill. And the pro game's always been a little bit more about the player than the coach. But it's fascinating that Walton loved both the restrictive mentor in college, the conservative mentor, and then the colorful NBA coach. And it shows the dexterity of his personality that they both loved him and he loved both. It would be like going Andy Reid to Belichick and you got along with both. Yeah. And I think that speaks so well.
100%. And then the one other kind of final act of his playing career, he wins Sixth Man of the Year for what a lot of people consider the greatest team ever, the 1986 Celtics.
Yes, great team.
And adds, and finds a way to fit in with that very unique culture absolutely seamlessly. This is, you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, oddly, on your podcast. He's one of the reasons why when Damian Lillard left the Portland Trailblazers and every story was written as greatest Blazer ever, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, Bill Walton played for them, and not to mention Clyde Drexler. No, he more so than Grant Hill, more so than Tracy McGrady, more so than Derrick Rose. He is the biggest what if he stayed healthy in NBA history, is Bill Walton.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. In the history, I'm trying to think, Roberto Clemente in baseball, the plane crash.
Sure.
I didn't grow up with Roberto Clemente, although I love those Pirates teams that were extended beyond him for years and years and years. But I think people look at Roberto Clemente and go, oh, that would have been maybe the greatest player of all time. And we've seen this with musical stars who have either taken their life or there have been tragedies beyond their control. But I think in sports, it's very rare that you have an athlete and everybody summarily agrees, oh, God, if he would have been healthy. And nobody fights it. Like every basketball historian's like, he was 21 of 22 against Memphis in a national championship game. 21 of 22.
Right, to go, by the way, after being undefeated on the freshman team and to finish his second straight undefeated year for the varsity team at UCLA. He had never lost a game, was going for his second straight title, and was 21 of 22. Yeah, there is the other athlete that comes to mind, I guess, would be Bo Jackson, where people are like, oh, man, what would have been? But Walton absolutely was on that level. And that, to me, is a testament to the beauty of his spirit. And I'm really glad we're spending the time on this, is that he didn't become bitter or jaded because of that. He instead transitioned to, okay, I'll make the most of what's left of my NBA career and then be associated. He went from calling the NBA Finals to doing Pac-12 After Dark and loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
And so God bless him and his friends and family.
I went back yesterday and watched 30, 35 minutes of old Blazer and UCLA. Anything I could get my hands on. He was on the Clippers. Yeah. And I'm glad you gave them credit. The best iteration of that Celtics team could have very well been the 86 team. And he was, Walton was just a phenomenal player. And, the only positive that ever comes out of a sudden death or one that surprises us is that it becomes a history lesson. And Walton is teaching us so much about getting along, viewing the world, willing to compromise your own goals, sacrificing for others. Bill's a bit of a walking history lesson. And the more you read about him, the better person you want to be. Like I read things on Bill yesterday. I'm like, I got to be better at that. I got to be a better teammate. And I think that's a great acknowledgement of Bill, is that you read things about him and think, I need to be a little better person.
And he might be, and I know we got to go, he might be the main character, or he is the main character of what might be the greatest sports book ever written, Breaks of the Game by Tom Halberstam. And so if people want to kind of, they followed the 77 Blazers around for a year, and Walton's at the center of that. And so now, goodness, that's almost a 50-year-old book at this point. But I don't know that any sports books ever topped it. It's definitely worth people's time if they want to know more about that era of basketball and also Bill Walton and that Blazers.
Give that book one more pop, because I'm going to buy it on Amazon. What's it called?
Oh, Breaks of the Game. Breaks of the Game. It's probably the most famous sports book of the, at least, I don't know, man, pre-Friday Night Lights maybe ever. Breaks of the Game by Tom Halberstam. I'm going to mispronounce his name. Halberstam, pardon me, is probably the greatest sports book ever written. Yeah, there you go. Free plug.
Hey, great seeing you, buddy.
Yeah, you too. See you later, Colin.